Hi, I'm Melanie La Barrie, and I was recently here at the Shaftesbury Theatre playing Angelique in the very fun, very cool musical and Juliet. Previously, many years before, I was here with another musical called Daddy Cool. So the Shaftesbury Theatre is a very, very special theatre to me. And in all the time that I have been here, and many years before that, there has been a very special person wandering these hallways and making sure that everything is okay. Our chief executive, James Williams. So you finally decided to give the keys back?
I have. I've got to the point in my life where I think it's about time someone else had a crack at this whip. It's been fantastic. Yes, over 20 years.
That's right.
And a whole range of different shows, and shows that many people thought I was absolutely mad to book, and other shows that people totally backed me on. But I think that throughout that whole time, we've stayed true to trying to be different from everyone else.
Yeah. So when you join, the profile of this theatre and the shows that were booked here were of a very different nature. So what was your thinking when you decided to put things on here?
The first word that was said to me when I joined was, "Why are you going to work for that basket case?" And then within 6 months of being here, there was an article in the Daily Telegraph, I think, that was saying, well, now that the Theatre Museum is closing, why don't they use the Shaftesbury Theatre as a theatre museum? So I was battling that and thinking to myself, how do I rescue this theatre? Because the first time I walked into it, just before I was appointed, I sat there and thought, this is wonderful. This is a space that works beautifully for shows. It's got a fantastic relationship with the audience from the stage. So why isn't it working? And I set out a strategy to the owner saying, what we need to do is we need to fix on the shows that we think are going to work here. And if they're not available, backfill beforehand so that you always have the shows you want. You're not just taking the shows that are available.
Right.
And that strategy then played into several shows that didn't have particularly great success, but started the rhythm going. And then in 2007, produced Hairspray. But Hairspray was a 2-year journey of me courting the American producers.
Right. And was a huge success.
It was the turning point for the theatre to have such a wonderful production, to then see it get, I think, 7 or 8 Olivier Awards, to have it led by Michael Ball, but at the same time, a fantastic ensemble company. And although now when I look at the show, I think it's dated, it was very much of its time, giving a message that was different to the messages you were getting from most shows at that point, which were very, let's face it, white orientated.
Right. Right. But then you put on like a lot of shows that brought a uniquely diverse audience to the Shaftesbury Theatre.
Yes, you go back to even the Far Pavilions, which is another show that didn't work, but that brought an Asian audience in that I didn't know existed in London.
Yes.
But it's every time from, and Daddy Cool, which you were in, again, produced a hugely mixed audience. And that matters to me because the key thing to making a theatre like this work is to make sure that you've got broad appeal to a large audience base, and then you stand a chance. If you fix down to a very specific style or subject in your show, you stand the risk of just becoming a minority interest. So to fill 1,300, 1,400 seats a night, you've got to think about everyone. Some shows are not necessarily my taste, but I want to see shows that the audience will want to go and see.
You know, it's so interesting that you decided to kind of go down that road to kind of open your doors and invite the wide range of people that we have living here in London and in the UK and say this place is there for you. I know that I ended up working with people who had seen me in Daddy Cool, who looked at me and said, there are people like me in theatre, and so therefore I can do theatre. And then to come back here and work with them, because they decided to take that path because they'd seen themselves represented on stage. That is a huge bonus to the West End theatre scene. But you talked about some shows not being to your taste. Have there been any shows that you thought, oh, I don't know, this is how this is going to go, that have been surprising hits?
I don't think there's been any that I didn't think, how they're going to go. The one show that probably I was more cynical about bookings than almost any other was Motown, because I'm of an age that would love the Motown catalogue, but I'd seen it on Broadway and I didn't think that it was a particularly well-structured piece of work. Mm-hmm. But it worked at a certain level with our audience, and talk about diversity, that audience was just from everywhere. And it was exciting. The one show that I probably took the biggest risk on, and I think I was the only theatre owner in London who even considered having it, and that was your show, and Juliet. That I'd explain to people, and they'd look at me with their eyes popping out, saying that I was mad. And indeed, when I first got a video of a New York workshop of it, and listened to the soundtrack, I thought I was probably not going to touch it with a barge pole. But I then talked to the producers and the writers of the show and said, the only way that this works is if you develop it in England. Or Britain. And to my sort of luck, they said, well, that's exactly what we think. Because I just thought you couldn't work a piece that was playing around with Shakespeare in the way that you did anywhere but in the UK. America, when it does Shakespeare, shoves you all into cod pieces and tries to do it as they think it should have been done in the Elizabethan times, and it doesn't quite work for me. You need to have fun with Shakespeare. I worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I've seen wonderful shows where people just take liberties with the language and make it work for a modern audience. So I knew that with David Westbury writing it and the company that was being assembled for it, we had a fighting chance. I'd also seen you and others in workshops on it and became more and more certain that it was going to work. And I think it was on about the second workshop I walked away with David Bloom, who was the press representative for the show. And we were walking down the Holloway Road and the two of us just looked at each other and said, that is going to work, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And even then, there were so many detractors. But it was the most exciting thing to do, to be the theatre that had brought about a brand new production. I didn't create it, the producers did, but to book it, to house it, and then see its subsequent success was just so thrilling.
And to look after it so lovingly during the great pause of 2020, 2021. It was a real difficult time for everybody, but I can't imagine that was an easy time for you as well.
It was really quite trying because firstly, having to shut the doors on the theatre emotionally just shook me. It's not what I do. I welcome people into our theatre. I welcome actors. I welcome producers. I work the whole team that works on the show. And suddenly to say, sorry guys, we're not open for business, was a really distressing thing. In many ways, for our good fortune, we were in the process of doing some building works here. And the builders phoned up within 4 days of me shutting the theatre and said, we think we can work. Because they were allowed to work. Building companies were allowed to work throughout the pandemic. And I said, well, prove to me, and you can come back. And for 18 months, I would come in here at 7:30 in the morning, unlock the building, let the builders in, go and do work in my office on my own, and then come down at 5:30 and knock up the building and go home. And cycling home from the West End in the middle of the pandemic, sometimes I would cycle from here, the Shaftesbury, right the way across Waterloo Bridge and not see a soul. And it was the most bizarre time to be in London. And you'd go home and you were stuck at home. You know, I'd find I'd go the long way to the shops on Saturday mornings just to get out and see something other than the four walls of home or here. So it was tough, and there were lots of false hope during that time. And each time you got a little bit of hope, you got excited, and then it was dashed again. But we did manage to get Aunt Juliet back, and in the time that we were allowed to come back, whilst we were still waiting for Aunt Juliet to be ready, we were able to have one or two other shows. And I can say this now because I'm leaving, but our owners probably wouldn't like it. I didn't care. I just wanted a show on that stage. It could have been any show. I wanted the theatre live again. And on the first night of the first show that we had, which was just an ABBA tribute, I had to give a speech, and I'm afraid I almost lost it because it was so emotional to be back with theatre after that pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. It really was. You touched on a couple of things there. One was the extraordinary redevelopment of the theatre and the works that happen inside of the theatre and in its immediate surroundings. Can you talk about overseeing that?
Well, I got a bit of previous. I often, when people say, well, why do you do this? I said, well, aged 8, my father was trained as a civil engineer. So I can remember being on building sites aged 8 with my dad, holding his pole while he stood behind the theodolite. So as a family, that has always been there. I trained as a stage manager, so I trained in technical side of theatre. So I've got an understanding and a love of that side of the theatre and how to support the shows that you put on the stage. And as I've progressed up the greasy pole and still not been found out, I've built buildings. Mm-hmm. So English Touring Theatre reside in a rehearsal room and offices that I masterminded, converting an old cheese factory. I went to Hampstead Theatre when they had just had a failed lottery bid and did the lottery bid that got the development of the new theatre and oversaw that. So by the time I arrived here at the Shaftesbury, I had a bit of a track record, and I like doing things well, and I'm prepared to push the boundary on things. Mm-hmm. So when we, after Hairspray, decided that we had a problem with the weight loading in our fly tower, perhaps over a couple of beers, me and a structural engineer sat down and thought, how can we do it? And the result is the 5th and 6th floor here, which is above the stage, providing a 35-ton grid for the shows, but at the same time, 3,000 square foot of offices on a new build on top of the heritage building. So that was quite a difficult thing to achieve, both structurally and to get it through planning and historic consent, but we managed it. So I was building up a reputation at that point. And also at that point, I was on representing the Business Improvement District. I was on the Camden Business Board. And I got wind that there was going to be this big project that was going to be called the West End Project that was going to improve the area from Euston Road down to St Giles High Street. And I could see on that they were going to pedestrianise certain areas, which included the space outside the theatre. So I started my campaign. And I can remember talking to the owners of the theatre and just saying, you know what you could do? You could dig out underneath the road and you could extend the auditorium out. And there was this grey, blank expression on their faces, almost to say, is off on another one. But in the end, they totally bought into it. So we have this large bar that is now underneath Prince's Circus, which is in front of the theatre, which is now cobbled and a pedestrianised area. And then on the other side, we've got stores and offices that we built around the theatre. And fortunately, we were able to do it during the pandemic So it meant that when Anne Juliet came back, it wasn't finished, but it was moving in the right direction, and we were able to do performances without too great a hindrance.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is I have a brain that will go places that people won't necessarily go, and I don't know why, but I like doing the impossible.
Well, I love that, because it means then that you are uniquely placed to deal with some of the challenges of running an independent theatre. It's not part of a group. So what are some of the challenges that you face?
Well, the challenge that you face with running a theatre on its own is that as soon as you have to shut it to do something, you lose money. So this building costs about £35,000 a week to run. So you close down for 10 weeks, you're getting close to £500,000 worth of money that you've lost. And you can only make that back by having a successful show that follows. So you either do it that way, but if you need to do major work, you're going to have to be closed for 18 months or 2 years. So I had to have a scheme when we built the Fly Tower to not do that. And in total, the Fly Tower caused the theatre to be closed for 16 weeks, but over about a 3-year period. So it didn't have an impact on the needs, the cash needs of the building. And then Anne Juliet, when it was coming into the theatre, I was very clear to the producers of it that we would be doing this building works. So everyone bought into it, and everyone knows the reason why we're doing it. It's explained properly. And that is something that we have to do, because again, we couldn't afford an extended dark period. Nature did something for us instead, but and we took advantage of it. But we would have been able to have built regardless of whether we'd had the pandemic or not. That is very different from if you own a theatre that's one of half a dozen theatres, where you can say, well, we can close that theatre and the other 5 will bring in sufficient money to allow us to keep that theatre closed. I have no choice. I have to find ways around it. But again, perhaps that's my natural brain. I just like challenges like that.
Yes.
And, might be bonkers.
Well, I love the idea of you kind of like just walking up and down the building like the theatre ghost during the pandemic, just here, just looking after this grand old lady. What have been some of your highlights of being here?
Well, I think Anne Juliet rates high amongst that, and that actually going and being in New York watching Anne Juliet, knowing that it wouldn't have happened without our commitment to this theatre. I loved Memphis. I thought it was a wonderful show, and Beverly Knight was superb in it, as was both Killian and Matt Cardle in the Huey role. Those have been wonderful things, but I've had great fun with things like The Illusionists, where you see children enthralled by magic on stage, and The Illusionist works in a very connected way with its audience, and that is fantastic. So there's all sorts of different things that make the show matter. And Mrs. Doubtfire is a wonderful family show. Hairspray, a wonderful family show, and they've all got messages. They're not anodyne without substance. They've got substance, but they're also hugely entertaining, and huge groups of people want to come and see them.
I cannot imagine this theatre without you. I truly can't. I mean, you've been here, for as long as I remember being here, and so much longer. What next for you?
Well, I'm not leaving totally.
Okay. I thought you might not. I thought you can't let go like that.
The New York owners very graciously said, look, we want to hang on to you for a little while. So for the next 4 years, although there is a new chief executive here, she'll be able to pick up a phone and get any advice, any help, or cry on my shoulder or whatever. And I hopefully will be able to turn the tears to laughter. So she can do that. At the same time, any issue that New York has, both with the theatre, but there are other activities that crossover television and theatre, I'm there. I'll talk about it. So I'm doing that. I'm going to be working with a ticketing company, trying to find a new way to sell tickets in the West End that is better for the producers, better for the owners of the theatres, so that we have greater control over the stock of the tickets, but also the relationship with the producers of the work and the audiences that are attending. So that matters a lot to me, that the audiences get a better deal out of it. And aside from that, we're sitting in a room called the Bertie Crewe Bar. That's named after Bertie Crewe, who designed this theatre. He also designed another theatre just down the road in Shaftesbury Avenue, which is the Savile Theatre. And I am being retained by the developers of that to help advise them on how to create that space. It's going to be occupied by Cirque du Soleil to start off with, but it needs to be a space that is going to be durable for the next century. So I'm working on trying to make it work for them for the next century, and trying to persuade the various planning authorities that we need another theatre in the West End, and that is one already there. Let's redevelop it, make it a working space, and enjoy Theatreland and everything that Theatreland can give to both the people of London, the broader UK audience, and the international guests that we welcome over at the holiday season.
Well, firstly, I want to say thank you for ushering the international success that is Juliet, because it's doing so brilliantly all over the world now. And we've both had the great joy to be a part of that. So many brilliant people have walked through the doors of the Shaftesbury Theatre, and you are one of them. And with your extraordinary and magnificent brain, I have no doubt that you will go on to do so many fantastic things as you continue your work here with the Shaftesbury Theatre. Thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you, Melanie. I'll also have some sleep, I think.
Yes, maybe some sleep will be good too. But knowing your brain, I don't know that it'll be that much.
A bit of rest and relaxation. It wouldn't go amiss.
Have a holiday.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.